You're watching CNBC On Demand.
In this episode of American Greed,
100 bottles of Cristal for everyone.
no one knows how to party like Jolo.
So he was known as a whale of the nightclub scene.
The mysterious businessman drops as much as $500,000 a night. He buys a $250 million super yacht and dates supermodels.
He would buy Bergen bags as gifts for the different models.
He was spending $10 million or $20 million at Las Vegas casinos.
He pals around with celebrities like Leo DiCaprio and even finances their movies.
Jolo gave Leonardo DiCaprio an Oscar that Marlon Brando originally won for On the Water.
Either, and steal on a scale the world has never seen.
This is one of the largest economic crimes in the history of the world.
Tonight, the man behind what may be the biggest theft of all time.
Then when I find out it was $4.5 billion, I was shocked.
And the New York bankers and other VIPs who benefited from his big bucks.
It's so interesting. The friendships that money...
Without asking any questions.
You don't question when somebody's a billionaire where the money's coming from.
In Hollywood. In January 2014, the Hollywood Foreign Press honors the best film and television productions at the 71st Golden Globe ceremony. Familiar faces grace the red carpet. Martin Scorsese, Tom Hanks, Idris Elba. One of the films nominated this year is Martin Scorsese's The Disgraced Stockbroker and Former American Greed Subject, Jordan Belfort, a.k.a. the Wolf of Wall Street. Belfort pleaded guilty to stealing more than $100 million from investors. Leonardo DiCaprio plays Belfort in a remarkable performance.
I'm talking about this.
The film is nationally Scorsese's highest-grossing film of his career.
I know you're not following what I'm saying anyway, right? That's okay.
For his efforts, DiCaprio is awarded the Golden Globe for Best Actor, Musical or Comedy.
Goes to Leonardo DiCaprio.
When he accepts the award, DiCaprio is specific in his thanks.
Thank you for being not only collaborators, but taking a risk on this movie, truly.
Joey and Riz are Joey McFarland and Riza Aziz, the producers and founders of the production company Red Granite Pictures. Joe is 33-year-old Joe Lowe, the principal funder of the movie.
The story goes that Martin Scorsese and Leonardo DiCaprio do the Jordan Belfort story. It was too expensive to make, the studio said. And so Leonardo DiCaprio and Jolo decided together that Jolo would finance The Wolf of Wall Street.
Leonardo DiCaprio became very close to Jolo.
You know, in the credits of Wolf of Wall Street, at the very end, there's a note, special thanks, Jolo.
But Jolo is the architect behind a massive world-class theft, stealing $4.5 billion from the country of Malaysia.
I think it's just safe to say this is one of the greatest frauds of all time, certainly in our time. And it's bigger than things like even the Bernie Madoff scandal.
Leonardo DiCaprio's award-winning film is financed with dirty money.
They made The Wolf of Wall Street a movie about crime, fitting that movie was financed by fraudsters about fraudsters.
The story of Jolo begins in the tiny Malaysian island of Penang, a former British colony. His family background is steeped in mystery. What is known is that Jolo's family is part of the ethnic Chinese minority, and his father owns a garment factory that provides people. He's the scion of a very rich family. Whether that's true or whether they are merely well off, it's clear there's enough money to get Jolo out of Penang.
His dad was successful enough to send Jolo away to a fancy British boarding school, Harrow, outside London.
Fancy is an understatement. Harrow is ancient. Shakespeare was a young lad when it was founded. Minister of India, Jawaharlal Nehru, King Hussein of Jordan, and Sir Winston Churchill. Jolo doesn't squander the opportunity to connect with the crazy rich and fabulously well-connected. In fact, one of the friendships he forges at Harrow is with Riza Aziz, a fellow Malaysian who eventually gets a shout-out from Leo at the
At the time, I believe, was the Minister of Defense.
After graduating from Harrow, Jolo moves to the United States and the University of Pennsylvania's Wharton School of Business. Once again, he makes connections to wealthy and even royal families from Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, and Abu Dhabi.
He even told some people that he was a prince in Malaysia.
While still enrolled in college, Lowe makes a name for himself as an alleged financial wizard.
He started an investment fund while he was at Wharton. And that was making investments on behalf of some wealthy families he knew in the Middle East and around the world at that time.
The company's name is the Winton Group. Tons of money.
He was very interested in using his social cachet and his social connections to get access to a lot of money to make investments.
And in a sign of things to come, Lowe is known for throwing ridiculous parties. For his 20th birthday, he rents out a club in Philadelphia, running up a $40,000 tab.
The famous party he threw at the University of Pennsylvania, he actually stiffed the club owners. He convinced them that he had the money, and then when it came to pay the bill, he said he didn't have it, and he ended up paying a lot less.
The youthful transgressions are written off, but the connections abide. After graduating from Wharton, he helps the Kuwait Finance House, the world's first Sharia-compliant bank, purchase an 80s Malaysia in 2006.
He was coming across to them as this sort of investing prodigy just because of the way he was able to talk and sell himself.
While Jolo knows how to talk, money speaks even louder. Next on American Greed. See how the mild-mannered Malaysian uses stolen money to realize his fantasies and burnish his... In New York, paparazzi have taken note. The New York Post, running a picture of Jolo with Usher, lays on the snark. His chubby, bespectacled appearance hardly meets the image of a wealthy gadabout.
Jolo appeared from nowhere. Like, literally, everybody was talking about this guy because he was spending between $300,000 and $500,000.
A journalist who covers New York City nightlife.
So obviously, all the promoters and the nightclub owners wanted him to come to their places because, he was spending a lot of money.
So the clubs he liked were Avenue, the Pink Elephant. He would go to Tao. And when he came in, he would take
of everything. He was kind of a shy guy. His thing was to buy Cristal champagne. He always had tons of bottles.
It would start off with 10 bottles of Cristal. And by the end of the night, everybody in the entire club was drinking their own bottle of champagne or something or another bought by Jolo.
A magnum of Louis Roederer Cristal retails for $700 per bottle. But at clubs, it can cost into Lindsay Lohan and surprises her with a gift.
Somebody told him that it was Lindsay Lohan's 23rd birthday. And so he bought 23 bottles of Cristal.
But one of Jolo's favorite celebrities to party with is Paris Hilton. Reporter Bradley Hope learns that Jolo is infatuated with the heiress.
I think he had a sort of fixation with Paris Hilton.
My understanding is that he became very interested in Paris Hilton in college and had a crush on her. So when he had the means, he then basically bought access to her.
He and Paris frolic on his yacht, gamble in Las Vegas, and go clubbing in the world. Says it's not uncommon for Hilton to be paid in the six figures for each appearance with Lowe.
She would either be getting paid directly in cash or, getting to spend in whatever she wants at the club. Or, when he would go gambling with people like Paris Hilton, he would actually give them chips, like $100,000 of chips, and they could go play and keep the profits.
Selma Fonseca shot this film, never before seen on American TV, of Paris and Jolo in action in Saint-Tropez.
Paris loves to have fun, so she was dancing and, getting the bottles, spraying champagne.
He's in the south of France, surrounded by all of, to be honest, the world's richest people, and he's just showing off.
100 bottles of freestyle for everyone.
He would go on the microphone. He would say something like, for the waiters to bring a bottle for every person that was inside of the club. So they would bring 100 bottles, and then give it to everybody.
What's interesting about Jolo is that...
Come here, girls.
Okay. And I think this was his way to buy in.
Using his wealth and status, Jolo is able to buy many things. Over a span of 2 years, the feds say Lowe spends $200 million on gifts and jewelry for his friends and fellow partiers.
Jolo loved to purchase gifts for women, Lex watches, and he would just give them away to models and other women he was hanging around with.
Joe sometimes just had a box full of Rolexes he would gift people. So he'd have things, thanks for coming, here's your Rolex.
He even dates Victoria's Secret model Miranda Kerr and lavishes her with $8 million in diamonds.
They started this kind of extremely lavish gifts.
He bought her diamonds, heart-shaped diamonds.
They also traveled around the world together on his private jet, and famously, he gave her a translucent piano in her house in California.
But the relationship doesn't even last a year. C'est la vie. While at Wharton, Jolo was called the Asian Great Gatsby, and no idea about the source of their host's wealth.
He would always purposefully kind of seed misinformation that made him sound more attractive.
He had told my friends that his parents owned the Petronas building, which at the time was the tallest building in the world.
He had told people he was royalty. There were even rumors that he was an arms dealer.
Then getting his money from. One inside observer said, "Nobody spends their own money like that. It's just weird." It gets even weirder. For most people, a 30 aren't Joe Lowe.
For me, this party is really the biggest, most grandest party of all. Essentially, they took over this piece of land on the Las Vegas Strip, and in the center of it was this party that had the biggest concentration of celebrities and music performers aside from the Oscars.
They created a kind of hangar, and they filled it with circus acts.
Going around, there was, an ice bar, there was performances on stage, fireworks. There was Psy with the rendition of Gangnam Style. There was people like Kanye West. At one point, the rapper Q-Tip was on stage, and Leonardo DiCaprio, who was a bit inebriated, jumped on stage and joined him in the rap.
From brilliant actors to Kim Kardashian. But the real highlight of the night is when it's time to sing to the birthday boy. It's another adolescent fantasy come true.
A giant birthday cake was wheeled out to the middle of the stage, and out popped Britney Spears, who did a rendition of Happy Birthday to Joe Lowe.
But one man at the party is nearly invisible amid all the glitter and glam. He's a relative unknown Asia desk. Could this Goldman connection be a clue about the source of Jolo's outrageous fortune? Next on American Greed, how authorities say Jolo pulled off one of the biggest thefts of all time.
Most people don't think they're ever going to get caught, right? And if you look at Jolo, Who's on his side? It's the Prime Minister of Malaysia. So who?
Seemingly overnight, Jolo graduates from Wharton to being a financial power player and international man of mystery. Does he owe it all to business acumen and hard work? At the exact moment his lucky number comes up. In April 2009, Najib Razak wins a national election and becomes Malaysia's 6th prime minister. Razak is the stepfather of Jolo immediately makes his move.
He was sort of entranced by people who had things he didn't have. So in this case, it was political power.
Jolo understood, right, the extreme importance of maintaining a strong relationship with Prime Minister Najib and his family.
During his time studying international finance, federal authorities say Jolo becomes fascinated with sovereigns, which controls a mind-bending $500 billion worth of assets, with the goal of investing for the good of the country. Jolo now has an audience with Malaysia's Prime Minister, and he pitches him on the idea that Malaysia should jump in the sovereign wealth pool.
Jolo came up with this idea at some point that tap into extreme amounts of money and power. But he learned that through people that he was introduced to in places like the UAE and Saudi Arabia.
It was supposed to be like the benevolent fund for the country of Malaysia, where money would get pulled in and generate funds that would help the people of Malaysia.
The new sovereign wealth fund is named One Malaysia Development Middle Eastern Model. Malaysia is at a disadvantage in starting its new fund.
In places like Saudi Arabia, those sovereign wealth funds are funded mostly through profits from the oil industry. But in Malaysia, they didn't have the billions of dollars needed for a sovereign wealth fund.
They were going to go borrow it. They were going to acquire debt. Essentially,
it means Malaysia's taxpayers are on the hook for the fund. Prime Minister Najib Razak is the fund chairman. Jolo never holds an official title, but is instead considered a consultant.
Jolo purposely did not have an official role in 1MDB. He stayed behind the scenes as sort of an advisor.
In reality, he was running the institution, but they treated him as if he was the absolute CEO of the fund.
One of the first projects they invest in is a joint venture with a Saudi oil extraction company. 1MDB chips in $1 billion in Malaysian state funds for the project. But according to bank records, much of the cash is rerouted to a shell company secretly held by Jolo. A thought the transaction.
So the first major theft from 1MDB is really just a kind of crazy brazen fraud. When it came to 1MDB, it was about to send the money. There were some changes done on the paperwork because obviously Jolo was controlling 1MDB. He could make these changes. And so with a simple signature from 1MDB, he suddenly had $700 million in his own account.
In the following years, financial giant Goldman Sachs, whose market capitalization is $134 billion.
Remember, the context is these sovereign wealth deals were happening not that long after the financial crisis in the U.S. And a lot of banks, including Goldman, were really looking internationally as a new source of big profits.
Tim Leissner is Goldman's point man with 1M birthday bash in Las Vegas. Leissner is a rising star at the firm, known for working hard and partying even harder. He dates and eventually marries reality TV star and former model Kimora Lee Simmons.
Access to the power structure of a place like Malaysia, knowing that they're in the process of building a sovereign wealth fund out, for Tim Leissner and the Asia desk of Goldman Sachs.
But according to investigators, Leissner has been warned about not doing business with Jolo. Anti-money laundering officers at Goldman Sachs have questions about how Lowe makes his money.
Timothy Leissner tried on multiple occasions to help Jho Low get in private banking, said, we don't feel comfortable with his source of funds. Within Goldman Sachs, the name Jho Low was considered a problem.
But the Fed say Leissner wants to do a deal with his friend, so he simply lies to his bosses at Goldman Sachs, and the internal investigation is dropped.
They were given assurances that Jho Low wasn't involved in the 1MDB deal.
Beginning into separate bond offerings, they ultimately raised $6.5 billion for 1MDB. For their efforts, Goldman Sachs collects $600 million in fees. And Tim Leissner is put on a pedestal.
Timothy Leissner, his career really took off because of this work that he did in Malaysia. One senior official said, everyone should do more like Tim Leissner's.
$0.5 billion would go a long way in Malaysia. The country is newly industrialized, but still developing.
The per capita income in Malaysia is $10,000 a year. When you go to Malaysia, you clearly see signs of poverty, but you also see signs of real economic development.
But once again, the bulk of the money never makes it to Malaysia's coffers.
Within days of getting the millions of dollars were being sent to shell company accounts held in Swiss banks. And then from there, if you follow the financial tracing further, the funds would then flow to other shell companies controlled by Jho Low.
Next on American Greed, Jho Low uses his abundant cash to invest in the United States.
He bought lavish pieces of extremely expensive, rare pieces of art.
More important endeavors when he arrives in the United States. In 2010, he hangs out a shingle called Ginwell Capital. According to its website, the firm cultivates lifelong partnerships with significant investors such as leading sovereign wealth funds.
So in places like New York, there's an entire industry devoted to catering to high net worth.
Feds say Jho Low's real business is laundering all the money he looted from Malaysia. Low uses shell companies to purchase a $24 million unit in Manhattan's Park Laurel building, a loft in Soho for nearly $14 million, a $140 million stake in the Park Lane Hotel, and a $30 million penthouse in the...
Jay-Z and Beyonce lived there. So, this place had a lot of cachet. It was flashy. It was luxurious.
In 2012, he partners with Sony Music and others to purchase EMI Music Publishing for $2.2 billion. The business contains the song catalog of Michael Jackson, Lady Gaga. Bob Dylan's contribution is $106 million.
These are major financial transactions.
As Jho Low's reputation grows, so does his celebrity circle. He gets friendly with musical artists like Busta Rhymes, Ludacris, Swiss Beats, and Alicia Keys. Keys even features in a promotional video for Ginwell Capital.
To encourage that type of bravery and boldness that really creates the timeless classics.
Jho Low becomes a major player in the New York art world. He buys works by Warhol, Basquiat, Van Gogh, and Picasso.
So he's not the most sophisticated art buyer. He was.
But Jho Low isn't just in an empire state of mind. In Beverly Hills, he buys the Viceroy Hotel for $40 million and a $39 million house in the hills that doubles as his own personal...
A home that was originally belonged to Ricardo Montalban in Hollywood.
But to really make it in L.A., you ought to be in pictures. In 2011, Jho Low invests in the upstart film studio Red Granite. The production company is co-founded by his old school buddy, Riza Aziz.
It kind of curried favor with Prime Minister Najib and the family by providing an opportunity for Riza Aziz to entrench himself into the Hollywood scene.
Red Granite produces a handful of films, including the sequel to the Jim Carrey smash Dumb and Dumber. But their crowning achievement is the adaptation of the raunchy memoir of 2 years.
The studios were passing on The Wolf of Wall Street because they thought it was just too excessive. The project wasn't moving forward. They couldn't find the money to make it.
DiCaprio finally sees his dreams realized when he meets the Red Granite team and their mysterious benefactor.
When Jolo heard the pitch with Riza, they said, look, we'll finance this.
It's a story as old as Hollywood. Deep pockets and dreams of seeing their name in the credits.
When people show up on the scene and start throwing tens of millions of dollars around, it certainly didn't take a seasoned investigator to understand that there was something wrong.
Next on American Greed, who says money can't buy happiness? Jolo's abundant cash appears to buy himself a best new bud.
Was an Oscar that was given to Marlon Brando.
Want more greed? Follow us on Instagram, connect on Facebook, and listen to the American Greed podcast wherever you get your podcasts. We'll be right back. To celebrate the founding of Red Granite and to announce their intention to make The Wolf of Wall Street, Jolo and his buddies throw a bash at the Cannes Film Festival in 2011.
The Cannes party is when Hollywood met Red Granite. They weren't really meeting Jolo, though. He wasn't such a big presence at...
Kanye West and Jamie Foxx perform on stage. Of course, the film's star, Leonardo DiCaprio, is there. The real-life wolf, Jordan Belfort, is also in attendance and has an interesting take. Remember the anonymous clubgoer who told the New York Post, "Nobody spends their own money like that, it's just weird"? Turns out the convicted felon, Belfort,
in this party and thinking it was a red flag for him. Nobody spends their own money like this. It had that feeling of stolen money.
It takes a thief. When it comes time to make the film, Red Granite spares no expense for Leonardo DiCaprio and director Martin Scorsese. They put up the entirety of the film's $100 million budget. And
because obviously the studio system asks a lot of hard questions. They say no to things, and they kind of curtail the creativity of some of these filmmakers. And here was Red Granite telling them, look, we'll just write a check.
One story is that the director of Wolf of Wall Street wanted to crash a real Lamborghini as opposed to a replica. But they were able to convince
The film debuts in December 2013 and is ultimately a success, making $392 million worldwide. Scorsese has directed films considered among the greatest of all time, such as Taxi Driver, Mean Streets, and Goodfellas. But it's this over-the-top saga of depraved greed that during production, Jolo allegedly becomes close with DiCaprio, both personally and professionally.
Jolo was going to fund their entire slate. So every project they wanted to do, if they wanted to do it their own way, he would be the guy that would fund it.
Leonardo DiCaprio's film company Appian Way is based in a building on the Sunset Strip. Red Granite's office is in the same building.
Projects, thinking about ideas.
Jolo buys a mansion in Beverly Hills around the corner from DiCaprio's home. He flatters his new friend by giving him $13 million worth of art, including works by Picasso, Basquiat, and photographer Diane Arbus. But Jolo's biggest and best gift to Leo is something more personal.
The story goes that when The Wolf of Wall Street, Riza Aziz and Jolo were able to, or purchased an Oscar that Marlon Brando originally won for On the Waterfront, and gave it to Leonardo DiCaprio as a kind of consolation prize.
Next on American Greed, Jolo's reckless spending finally catches up with him when he buys his...
The creation of this incredible yacht, which at the time was the most expensive yacht to ever be built.
In 2014, Jolo attains membership in one of the most exclusive clubs yet when he purchases a 300-foot-long super yacht for the reasonable price of $250 million.
It was just about the size of a football field.
The super yacht features a sauna, a helicopter landing pad, and a jacuzzi for entertaining celebrity friends.
It was gaudy.
It had everything. This is why people steal money.
But while Jolo lives it up on the high seas, a storm is brewing. He's currently being investigated by multiple parties. In February 2015, Louise Story of the New York Times has one of the first big exposés on Jolo. For more than a year, she's been investigating the use of LLCs and shell companies' Time Warner Center. The mysterious Jolo is one of the first people featured in her series.
As I talked to bankers in Malaysia, I found out that Jolo had been an investor to 1MDB. So that right there opened a big can of worms.
Over at the Wall Street Journal, Bradley Hope and his colleague Tom Wright have their own series investigating...
Stories saying the FBI was investigating Goldman Sachs. And then we continue to write about things that U.S. investigators were doing.
The Fed's investigation is part of their new initiative to crack down on international corruption cases.
Jolo's behavior made it crystal clear that the connections to the United States were extremely strong.
From 2009 to 2015, U.S. authorities say 4.5 in a vast international conspiracy. In 2016, the U.S. government files a civil forfeiture complaint seeking the recovery of more than $1 billion in assets bought with stolen money. Jolo initially resists the government's actions, but eventually gives up.
He didn't necessarily cooperate. He just sort of gave up the fight. Jolo never made an admission of guilt, but he...
include his real estate holdings in New York and L.A., the jewelry gifted to Miranda Kerr, and the artworks and Brando Oscar given to Leonardo DiCaprio.
I will say that the FBI did not necessarily have to hit down any doors, but Leonardo DiCaprio only turned his assets over to the FBI after they were named in a complaint.
At the time of auctioning it off to raise money for his charity. And in a first, the U.S. government seizes several films when they crack down on Red Granite Pictures.
The United States seized the rights to several movies, including The Wolf of Wall Street, because they were made directly with money stolen from 1MDB.
Red Granite settles and pays the U.S. government 60 million criminal charges. However, Red Granite co-founder Riza Aziz surrenders $60 million in assets to the U.S. government. His partner, Joey McFarland, surrenders $14 million in cash and assets. Jolo's celebrity friends also are never charged with any crimes. American Greed reaches out to Leonardo DiCaprio, but receives no response.
There isn't culpability for celebrities if they just want to hang out with bad guys. It becomes criminal if they know where the money is coming from.
In 2018, U.S. prosecutors filed criminal charges against Goldman Sachs executive Tim through the U.S. financial system. The feds say he also helped bribe government officials with $1.6 billion in stolen money.
Bribes were paid to government officials in Malaysia. Goldman Sachs has admitted that their Malaysian subsidiary has paid those bribes in order to ensure that Goldman Sachs received that business.
In violation of the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act. He also agrees to forfeit $43.7 million. He awaits sentencing. Goldman Sachs also agrees to pay a $2.9 billion penalty for its role in the scheme.
And they paid the largest criminal penalty for an international corruption case in DOJ history.
In 2018, Jolo is at the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, but he flees the U.S. and avoids arrest. However, authorities do find his super yacht. It's anchored off the coast of Bali. FBI agents and Indonesian authorities seize the vessel, but Jolo is not on board. The super yacht becomes a focal point in the upcoming elections in Malaysia, where the
ultimate example of the level of corruption here, that this mega yacht was purchased at a price that could have done so much good for the people of Malaysia.
In 2018, the scandal tanks Najib Razak's re-election efforts as he suffers a resounding defeat. In 2020, the former prime minister is tried and found guilty in breach of trust. Razak is sentenced to 12 years, but has yet to set foot behind bars.
I think one of the things sometimes we hear is that money laundering or foreign corruption, these are financial crimes with no real victims. Well, there were victims because all of this money that was raised and spent, now who's holding the bag for it? It's the Malaysian people.
As for Jolo, he flees Malaysia and is reportedly living in China, living in the home of a high-ranking member of the Chinese Communist Party.
I think it's safe to say he's in possession of a massive fortune. You know, a lot of money from 1MDB was never recovered.
Regardless, Jolo's jet-setting days are over. Aspiring Hollywood filmmakers and Daddy.
And he will never be able to travel freely around the world. His days of partying with Leonardo DiCaprio are over.
Essentially, he's in a kind of no man's land where he has a lot of money and he's able to move around freely within China, but that's about it.
He will be a fugitive from the United States for the rest of his life, and the United States will never stop looking for him.
Chapter 26, The Cold Case Redemption. 10 years after Michael Schreckingest was led away in chains, Colorado had changed. The meth epidemic had morphed. The identity theft rings had moved into the deep web, and the red flag mailboxes were being replaced by paperless billing. But the scars remained. Virginia Dissette was now an advocate for victims of identity theft. She spoke at conferences, telling her story to remind the world that a name is a precious commodity. I still have the orange jumpsuit in a box in my attic, she told a crowd of bankers. Not because I want to remember the jail, but because I want to remember that the system can fail the innocent just as easily as it catches the guilty. Tammy Carroll stood in the back of the room, listening. She was now a senior counselor at the Road to Sobriety. She had rebuilt her life, her children were grown, and she was no longer a forger of names. She was a restorer of lives. After the speech, Tammy approached Virginia. "I'm the reason you were arrested," Tammy said, her voice steady, but her eyes filled with a decade of regret. "I used your name to buy my high. I'm sorry." Virginia looked at the woman. She didn't see the wig or the sunglasses of the surveillance tapes. She saw a human being who had clawed her way out of the dark. "I spent years hating you," Virginia said softly, "but I realized that the hate was just another thing you stole from me. I want it back. I forgive you." In that moment, the ghost of the forgery was finally laid to rest. The paperwork was still there. The digital footprints remained. but the power they held over these two women was gone. Chapter 27, The Evolution of the Hunt. The FBI task force in Chicago was eventually disbanded, but the file on the Wheaton Bandit stayed on Agent Eric Cayley's desk. He's retired, Cayley told a group of new recruits, or he's dead, or he's in another country, but he changed the way we do business. Modern banking was now a fortress of digital biometrics and AI-driven behavior analysis. The white hat thieves like Jim Stickley were now working with global corporations to protect data that moved at the speed of light. But the fundamentals of greed were still the same. They don't want your Sterlings or your Harleys anymore, Cayley said, pointing to a new case involving cryptocurrency fraud. They want your digital soul. They want your private keys. They want the you that exists in the cloud. The war on deception had moved to a new front, but the hunters were still the same. They were people like Jim Rock, Kirsten Gregg, and Danya Davis, people who believed that truth was worth the paperwork and that justice was worth the wait. As the sun set over the Denver skyline, the red flags on the mailboxes stood like silent sentinels of a passing age. The world was louder, faster, and more connected than ever, but in the quiet spaces between the digits, the ghost of identity still walked. And as long as there were names to be stolen, there would be hunters in the mist, ready to bring the shadows into the light. Chapter 28, The Witness's Purgatory. Living as a ghost is its own kind of prison. Joyce Brandon, now officially designated as Subject 74B in the Federal Witness Protection Program, lived in a small town in Oregon that smelled perpetually of damp pine and wood smoke. Her new name was Martha Green. Martha Green liked gardening and worked as a librarian. Martha Green was a woman who spoke in soft tones and avoided eye contact with men in expensive suits. But Joyce Brandon was still there, trapped beneath Martha's skin. Every time a car slowed down near her house, her heart would climb into her throat. Every time a stranger asked for a book on medical history, she would feel the cold phantom of Dr. Martinez's scalpel near her neck. The doctor is in prison. Her handler, a gruff man named Special Agent Vance, no relation to the bandit, would tell her during their monthly check-ins. He's serving 25 years. He can't hurt you. A man like that doesn't need to be free to hurt you, Joyce would reply. He has money. He has reach. He has people who owe him their lives and their deaths. She spent her nights reading, not for pleasure, but for vigilance. She followed the news of cyber heists and data breaches. She knew that in the digital age, a physical location was only as safe as the last firewall. One evening, while closing the library, she saw a man standing across the street. He was tall, wearing a dark coat, and he was staring directly at her. His eyes, even from 20 yards away, seemed to glow with a sharp, piercing intelligence. She didn't run. She didn't scream. She simply locked the door and dialed the emergency number. By the time the local police arrived, the man was gone. But for Joyce, the message was clear. The war was never over. You could change your name, your hair, and your city, but greed was a hound that never lost the scent. Chapter 29, The Shadow of Vance. Detective Steve Hamill never believed David Vance had truly disappeared. He spent his weekends the time he was supposed to spend fishing or with his grandkids scouring military discharge records and private security databases. He's a ghost. Steve, his wife would say, "Let him go." "I can't," Hamill would reply. "He's the only one who beat us. Everyone else made a mistake. He made 16 perfect hits, and the only reason he stopped was because of a lucky witness. That's not a criminal. That's a soldier." Hamill's obsession bore fruit on a rainy Tuesday in 2014. A notification popped up on his screen. A set of fingerprints had been uploaded to the national database from a small police department in Arizona. A man had been picked up for a minor traffic violation. He had no ID, provided a false name, and fled before the prints could be processed. But the machine had done its job. The match was 99.8%. David Vance. Hamill was on a plane within 3 hours. The Arizona desert was a far cry from the snow-covered suburbs of Wheaton. Here, the heat was a physical weight. Hamill met with the local sheriff, a sun-baked man who looked like he was carved out of granite. He's living in a trailer park about 10 miles out, the sheriff said. Calls himself Tex. Keeps to himself, works day labor. When they moved in on the trailer, they didn't find a battle-hardened bandit. They found a man sitting in a lawn chair, watching the sunset. He didn't have body armor. He didn't have a scanner. He just had those eyes. David Vance. Hamill asked, his gun drawn, but his heart heavy. The man looked at him. He didn't move. He didn't reach for a weapon. He just sighed along. Weary sound that seemed to carry the weight of a decade of running. "You took your time, Detective," Vance said. "I was starting to think you'd forgotten about me." As the handcuffs clicked into place, Hamill realized that the bandit hadn't been hiding. He had been waiting. The rush of the robberies had long since faded, replaced by the hollow silence of a life stolen from himself. Chapter 30, The Final Ledger. The capture of the Wheaton bandit didn't make the front pages. By 2014, the world had bigger ghosts to chase. But in a small courtroom in Illinois, the tellers of 16 banks finally got to look into the eyes that had haunted their dreams. John Anglin sat in the front row. When Vance was let in, he looked at her. He didn't sneer. He didn't apologize. He simply nodded. "I realized then," Shauna would later say, "that he wasn't a monster. He was just a man who had lost his way in the pursuit of a thrill. He had traded our safety for a minute of power, and in the end, he had nothing to show for it." David Vance was sentenced to 40 years. He would die in a cell, a fitting end for a man who had spent his life building invisible walls around himself. Dr. Martinez's appeals were all denied. His mansion was sold to pay back the insurance companies, and his name was scrubbed from the medical boards. Joyce Brandon, the woman who had been Subject 7 for B, was allowed to return to a version of her old life, though she would always keep a small suitcase packed by the door. In Denver, Detective Jim Rock retired. He spent his days teaching new recruits how to follow paper trails. The tools change, he would tell them, pointing to a holographic display of blockade transactions. But the motive is as old as the hills. Men want what they haven't earned. They want to be someone they aren't. Your job is to remind them that in the end, you only have one name. And if you lose it, you lose everything. The Colorado sun still shines over the Denver suburbs. The red flags still rise on the mailboxes, though they are fewer now. The world is digital, fast, and fragmented. Identity is more fragile than ever, a collection of bits and bytes floating in a cloud of corporate algorithms. But the story of American greed remains the same. It is a story of ghosts and hunters, of stolen names and found truths, and of the enduring, fragile hope that in the war for who we are, the truth will always be the last thing standing. Chapter 31, The Contract from Within. In the high-security wing of the state penitentiary, Dr. Martinez did not spend his time reflecting on his sins. He spent it measuring the distance between his cell and his vengeance. He still had resources. A man who steals $5 million doesn't keep it all in one place. There were offshore accounts, hidden in the names of distant relatives and shell companies' identities that the FBI had not yet mapped. Through a series of coded messages passed during legal visits, Martinez put out a contract. Subject 7 for B. The message read, location, Pacific Northwest. Requirement, permanent silence. The hitman he hired was not a common criminal. He was a cleaner from the dark web, a man who navigated the cracks of the digital world as easily as he navigated the back streets of a city. He was known only as the Eraser. The Eraser began by tracking the movement of federal U.S. Marshal funds. He didn't look for Joyce. He looked for the paper trail of her existence. He found the small librarian in Oregon through a series of coincidental Amazon deliveries and a utility bill that had been misfiled in the regional database. Greed isn't just about money. Doctor, the Eraser whispered into a burner phone. It's about the possession of a life. And I'm about to take hers back for you. Chapter 30E. A pine-scented nightmare. Joyce Brandon Martha Green knew she was being hunted. The tall man across the street in Oregon hadn't been a hallucination. She had seen the way he stood too still, too observant. He lacked the casual indifference of a local. He had the laser focus of someone who was waiting for a signal. Agent Miller, she said when her old contact picked up. The shadow is back. We're moving you. Joyce, pack the suitcase. But the Eraser was already ahead of the marshals. He had compromised the local police dispatch. When Joyce's call went through, he intercepted the GPS coordinates of the safe house they were moving her to. The night of the move was thick with rain. The pine trees swayed like jagged teeth against the gray sky. Joyce sat in the back of a black SUV, clutching her small bag. "We're taking the back road, Martha," the driver said. Joyce frowned. The driver's voice didn't sound like the regular transport team. It had a hollow, metallic ring to it. She looked at the rearview mirror. The eyes staring back at her weren't the weary, professional eyes of a marshal. They were the eyes of a shark. "You're not with the FBI," Joyce whispered. The driver didn't reply. He simply accelerated into the darkness of the mountain pass. Chapter 33, The Ledger of Blood. The FBI wasn't as slow as the eraser hoped. Agent Miller had noticed the breach in the dispatch system within minutes. "They have her," Miller shouted, rallying the tactical team. "Intercept that SUV before it hits the gorge." It was a race against time and technology. Miller used the very digital tools that Martinez had once manipulated. He tracked the SUV's internal diagnostic system, a feature the hitman had forgotten to disable. The confrontation happened at the edge of a rain-slicked bridge. Miller's team boxed the SUV in. The eraser stepped out, his hands raised, a cold smile on his face. He knew the game was up, but he had already achieved his psychological goal. Joyce Brandon was trembling in the back seat, her sense of safety shattered once again. "The doctor sends his regards," the eraser said as the cuffs went on. "Even in a cage, he owns your name. Joyce, he'll always own it." Chapter 30th, Legacy of the Ghost. Dr. Martinez's sentence was extended to life without the possibility of parole after the murder-for-hire plot was unraveled. The eraser was sentenced alongside him. Joyce Brandon chose to leave the protection program. "I can't live as a ghost anymore," she told Miller. "If I'm always running, then he's still winning. I'm taking my real name back. If he wants to find me, let him try. But I won't be Martha Green anymore." She returned to Chicago, not as an office manager, but as a consultant for the Bankers Association, teaching them the psychology of the inside threat. In his cell in Illinois, David Vance the Wheaton bandit read about the Martinez case in the prison library. He looked at the blue eyes of the doctor in the newspaper photo. "Amateurs," Vance muttered, closing the paper. He understood the doctor's mistake. Martinez wanted to be a god. Vance just wanted to be a phantom. One sought the world's worship, the other sought the world's fear. And in the end, both were just numbers in a database. The Chronicles of American Deception reached a final, quiet chapter. Virginia Dissett finally got a law passed in Colorado, the Dissett Act, which required banks to provide immediate, free identity rehabilitation services to victims of forgery. Tammy Carroll stood next to her as the governor signed the bill. The two women, once predator and prey, were now the architects of a safer world. They had proven that while an identity can be stolen, a person's character is a fortress that no thief can breach. As for the Wheaton bandits' blue eyes, they eventually faded behind the thick glass of a prison infirmary. But his legend remained a ghost story told to every new teller on their first day. A reminder that in the safe apple pie suburbs of America, the bushes always have eyes. Chapter 35. The Silicon Vulture. The year was 2024. The world was no longer just digital. It was algorithmic. Identity was no longer a ghost in a machine. It was a ghost synthesized by intelligence. In a high-rise in Palo Alto, a young man named Elias Thorne stared at a wall of monitors. He didn't use meth. He used nootropics and dark roast espresso. He didn't dig through mailboxes. He scraped public social media profiles and breached poorly secured cloud storage. Elias was a deep fake architect. "Look at this," he said to his partner, a shadow known only as C Drive. "I've mapped Virginia Dissette's granddaughter's vocal patterns. I can call the bank as her, and the voice biometrics will pass with a 99.9% match." The legacy of the Dissette name had come full circle. Virginia had fought for the law to protect physical identity, but the new front was the human essence itself. Elias used AI to create a digital twin of a high-profile target. He didn't just steal a name, he stole the target's presence. He had created a fake telehealth clinic, inspired by the rumors of the Martinez scandal he had read about in a dark web forum. He called it Fine Arts Medical. It promised untraceable aesthetic procedures. In reality, it was a data mining operation that poached insurance credentials from the wealthy and the desperate. "We aren't just billing for surgeries that didn't happen." Elias smiled, his eyes reflecting the blue light of the screens. "We're billing for lives that don't exist, using the insurance of people who think we're helping them stay young." The American greed had evolved into its most abstract form, a parasite of the soul. Chapter 36. The Daughter's Debt. Sarah Dissette, Virginia's granddaughter, was a cybersecurity researcher. She had grown up on the stories of her grandmother's arrest and the red flag mailboxes. She knew the weight of a stolen name better than anyone her age. When her bank account was drained via a voice-authorized wire transfer, she didn't panic. She felt a cold, familiar anger. "They're using the old family name," Sarah told her grandmother, who was now in her 80s, her eyes still sharp behind thick glasses. "They always come back for the names." "Sarah," Virginia whispered, "greed is a circle. It just gets wider." Sarah traced the IP address of the request. It didn't lead to a meth house or a medical clinic. It led to a decentralized server in a tax haven. But she found a signature-specific line of code that looked like an H. The H file, Sarah realized. The hacker is using a modified version of the old Martinez shadow server architecture. Someone's been studying the archives. The ghost of the surgeon was being resurrected by a vulture in Silicon Valley. Chapter 37. The Deepfake Mirror. Elias Thorne's masterpiece was the identity mirror. He didn't just steal Sarah's money, he created a deepfake video of her confessing to a corporate espionage crime she didn't commit. The police arrived at Sarah's apartment with the same professional grimness that Virginia had faced decades ago. Sarah Dissett, there's a warrant for your arrest. High-level digital fraud. Sarah didn't laugh. She didn't cry. She looked at the officer's body camera. You're seeing what the algorithm wants you to see, she said. My grandmother fought the paperwork. I'm going to have to fight the math. As she was led away, the news cycle picked up the story. In a prison cell in Illinois, an elderly David Vance watched the report on a grainy television. He saw the name Dissett and the mention of deepfake. He looked at his own hands wrinkled, the blue of his eyes now cloudy with cataracts. They're stealing the light now, he whispered to the stone walls. They don't even need the bushes anymore. Chapter 38, The Virtual Scalpel. The new fine arts medical was billing millions. Elias had automated the Martinez scheme. Using AI agents, he processed thousands of fraudulent insurance claims per hour. He didn't need to fear a whistleblower like Joyce Brandon because there were no human employees. It was a sterilized, perfect crime, or so he thought. Sarah Dissett, working from a high-security laptop provided by a vigilante group of white hat hackers, managed to find the hallucination in Elias's code. He's efficient, but he's arrogant, Sarah told her team. He's using a recurring routing number that belonged to a defunct medical supply company Martinez once owned. He's a fanboy. He's obsessed with the legacy of the crime. She didn't call the police. She called the insurance company's automated defense systems and fed them a digital virus that mirrored the fraudulent claims. Elias Thorne watched in horror as his monitors began to flicker. His AI agents weren't just processing claims anymore. They were reporting themselves. The identity mirror he had used against Sarah began to project his own face, reconstructed from the fragments of his dark web history. Who are you? Elias typed frantically into the console. A message appeared on the screen, simple and elegant. I'm the granddaughter of the woman who fought the paperwork, and your math is wrong. Chapter 39, The Vigilante's Ledger. The FBI's new cyber identity unit moved in on the Palo Alto high-rise. They didn't find a meth addict or a surgeon. They found a boy in an expensive ergonomic chair, surrounded by the ghosts of his own making. Elias Thorne was arrested not for forgery, but for digital identity dismantlement, a new charge born from the evolution of the Dissett Act. Sarah Dissett stood on the balcony of her apartment, looking out over the city lights. She had cleared her name, but the world felt thinner. The boundary between the real and the synthesized was becoming a mist. It's done, Grandma, she called Virginia. Is it? Virginia asked. Or did we just buy another 10 years? Chapter 40, The Infinite Deception. In the quiet library of the state prison, David Vance sat with a new inmate, a young man who had been caught in a crypto scam. You the Wheaton Bandit? The kid asked, his eyes filled with a misplaced reverence. Vance didn't look up from his book. There's no such thing as a bandit anymore. Kid, there's just the algorithm. I was a man with a gun. You're a man with a ghost. Both of us are just data in the end. Outside, in the suburbs of Wheaton, a new bank opened. It had no tellers. It had no bushes. It had only a screen and a voice that sounded like your mother, or your daughter, or yourself. Identity was still a ghost, but now the ghost had learned how to dream. And in the heart of the American dream, the greed was no longer a shadow, it was the light itself, blinding and infinite, waiting for the next name to flicker. Chapter 41, The Echo in the Code. The arrest of Elias Thorne sent ripples through the underground, but it also woke up the sleeping giants. Deep within the encrypted archives of the now-defunct Fine Arts Medical, a subroutine triggered by Elias's failure began to execute. This wasn't Thorne's code. It was a legacy script, a dead man's switch hidden by Martinez's original technicians, designed to scrub the evidence of the multi-million-dollar offshore accounts by laundering them through thousands of legitimate identities. Sarah Dissette, still monitoring the network from her balcony, saw the surge. "It's a memory leak," she whispered, her fingers flying over the keyboard. "But it's intentional. It's a purge." The ghosts of the medical scam were attempting to vanish once and for all, taking the stolen futures of thousands with them. Sarah knew she couldn't stop the purge, but she could redirect the flow. She began to map the destination addresses not to untraceable wallets, but to a newly formed restitution fund she had built as a tribute to her grandmother's struggle. "Identity isn't just a record," she muttered, the glow of the screen reflecting the same sharp focus that once lived in Detective Rock's eyes. "It's a debt. And today, the debt gets paid." Chapter 42, The Last Vestige. In a hospice ward in Joliet, David Vance felt the world receding. The monitors chirped a rhythmic, synthetic heartbeat that felt like an insult to a man who once controlled his own destiny with a tactical hood and a police scanner. A nurse entered. She was young, her eyes hidden behind a pair of smart glasses that constantly fed her patient data. "Time for your meds, Mr. Vance," she said, her voice filtered through a translation app that smoothed out the rough edges of reality. Vance looked at her. For a second, he didn't see a nurse. He saw Jennifer from the bank. He saw the terror in the teller's eyes. He saw the blue eyes in the sketch that had ended his reign. "Do you know who I am?" he rasped. The nurse tapped her glasses. "Your patient 9092. Severe cardiac failure. DNR on file." Vance chuckled a dry, rattling sound. "Good. At least the machines know I'm finished." As he drifted toward the final shadow, a notification pinged on the nurse's tablet. A massive, anonymous deposit had been made into the hospice's charitable fund, specifically designated for the comfort of long-term inmates. Sarah Dissette had redirected a fragment of Martinez's blood money to ease the passing of the man who had haunted her town. It wasn't an act of mercy. It was an act of balance. In the ledger of American greed, every ghost eventually pays for its keep. Chapter 43, The Resonance of Truth. Virginia Dissette sat on her porch in the Colorado twilight. The mountains were a dark, jagged inkwash against the purple sky. Beside her, Sarah sat with her laptop closed, the silence of the evening a welcome relief from the roar of the data stream. "Did you find him, Sarah?" Virginia asked softly. "I found the money, Grandma, and I found the man. He's gone now." Virginia nodded. She thought about the orange jumpsuit. She thought about the Saturday shock of the blue lights. She thought about Tammy Carroll, who had found redemption in the minimum wage honesty of a sober life. "The names aren't ours, Sarah," Virginia said. "The world borrows them from us to keep score. But what we do with them, that's the only thing the thieves can't touch." The chronicles of American deception had come to a close. The paperwork had been filed, the math had been solved, and the ghosts had been laid to rest. But as the first stars appeared over the Rockies, both women knew that the circle was never truly closed. Greed would find a new language, a new medium, a new mask. But as long as there were those willing to stand in the light, the shadows would always have a hunter. Chapter 44, The Library of Souls. The victory over Elias Thorne felt like a splash in a vast, dark ocean. Sarah Dissette had returned to her work at the cybersecurity firm, but the strings she had pulled to expose Thorne had left her connected to something much larger. One evening, a single file appeared on her desktop. It wasn't sent via email, and it didn't leave a trace in the company's firewall logs. It was just there. The file name was SOULS_catalog_v1.exe. When Sarah opened it using a decoupled, air-gapped terminal, she didn't see code. She saw a gallery of faces, thousands of them, high-definition portraits, credit histories, medical records, and private journals. "This isn't a hack," she whispered, her heart racing. "This is a marketplace." At the bottom of the catalog was a signature that made her blood turn to ice. A digital watermark in the shape of a stylized M intertwined with a scalpel. The Martinez network hadn't died when the doctor was sentenced to life. It had evolved into the Library of Souls. The library was a global syndicate that treated identity not just as a tool for fraud, but as a commodity for the ultra-wealthy. Why be yourself when you can buy the history, the reputation, and the physical appearance of a saint or a ghost? Chapter 45, The Chicago Echo. In Chicago, Joyce Brandon, who had reclaiming her name after years in witness protection, was leading a quiet life as a risk management consultant. She thought the shadows were behind her, but the past has a way of repeating its rhythms. A courier delivered a heavy, wax-sealed envelope to her office. Inside was no letter, only a single photograph. A 6:30 a.m. shot of the bushes outside the Winfield Bank where the Wheaton Bandit had first struck. On the back of the photo, in a handwriting that was chillingly familiar, were the words, "The blue eyes are watching again. Joyce, but this time, they don't need a gun." Joyce felt a familiar prickle of dread. David Vance was dead. She had seen the reports. But the Wheaton Bandit was more than a man. He was a symbol of suburban vulnerability. Someone was using his legend to send a message. She called Agent Miller. It's starting again. Miller. Not the robberies. The fear. Chapter 46. The Archives of Joliet. Before his death, David Vance had spent hours in the Joliet prison library, writing in a series of leather-bound journals. The state had confiscated them, labeling them as criminal memorabilia, but the journals had mysteriously vanished from the evidence locker weeks after his funeral. Sarah Doucette, tracking the SOULS_ catalog back to its origin, found a link to the Joliet servers. He wasn't writing a memoir, Sarah realized as she decrypted a fragment of the journals she found on a dark web auction site. He was writing a map. David Vance had spent his final years analyzing the system that had eventually caught him. He had predicted the rise of the algorithmic thief. He had documented the exact points where a person's life could be digitized and stolen. The bush is no longer made of leaves, Vance had written in his final entry. It is made of logic. The bandit of the future will not park in a cul-de-sac. He will park in your cloud, and he will wait for you to invite him in. Chapter 47, The Data Reaper. The mastermind behind the Library of Souls was a figure known only as the Reaper. Unlike the meth-addicted forgers of the 2000s, the Reaper was a man of immense discipline and technological prowess. He had taken the crude medical scams of Dr. Martinez and refined them into a global digital immortality service. For $50 million, the Reaper could erase a client's past no matter how criminal and provide them with the identity of a deceased individual with a spotless record. Names are just labels on jars, the Reaper told a client in a secure, VR encrypted boardroom. We provide the jars. You provide the will to be someone else. The Reaper's latest target for a clean soul was a high-ranking politician who needed to vanish. And the jar they had selected was David Vance. Or rather, the legend of David Vance. They wanted to create a digital version of the Wheaton Bandit that could be blamed for a series of high-level cyber heists, providing a perfect cover for their own thefts. Chapter 48, The Vigilante's Choice. Sarah Doucette stood at a crossroads. The FBI's Cyber Identity Unit wanted her to act as a consultant, which meant following the rules, filing reports, and waiting for warrants. But the Library of Souls moved at the speed of light. Every hour she waited, another soul was harvested, digitized, and sold. She looked at her grandmother, Virginia, who was sleeping in the chair beside her. Virginia had fought the system for years, only to realize that the system was often as slow as the criminals were fast. I'm not going to wait for a warrant, Grandma, Sarah whispered. She activated a suite of whitehead viruses she had been developing code designed to act like a digital autoimmune system. She wasn't just going to track the library, she was going to burn it from the inside out. She used the signature of the H file, the very code that Martinez and Elias Thorne had used to lure the Reaper's AI agents into a trap. Chapter 49, The Shadow over Wheaton. A series of robberies began occurring across the Chicago suburbs. But these weren't physical banks. They were digital vaults, secure servers where high-net-worth individuals stored their biometrics and private keys. Each hit left a calling card, a digital image of a tactical hood, and the sound of a police scanner. The news outlets were calling it the return of the Wheaton Bandit. The panic was real. People were closing their digital accounts, reverting to cash, and living in a state of constant paranoia. Joyce Brandon knew it was a distraction. They want us looking at the ghost, she told the task force. While they steal the reality, she and Sarah Doucette, connected via an encrypted line, began to piece together the truth. The Library of Souls was using the Wheaton Bandit's legacy to crash the digital identity market, intending to buy up the devalued data at pennies on the dollar. Chapter 50, The Final Decryption. The confrontation didn't happen in a bank lobby or a desert trailer park. It happened in the architecture of a global server farm in Iceland, where the library's core was hidden. Sarah Doucette's autoimmune code reached the center of the catalog. She saw the faces again, thousands of them. And there, at the very end of the list, was her own. Doucette, Sarah, target, harvest, reason, termination of legacy. The Reaper wasn't just stealing names. He was trying to end the bloodline of those who dared to hunt him. Sarah didn't flinch. She entered the final commander restitution protocol. Instead of just deleting the data, the code began to auto-authorize the return of all stolen funds and the immediate reporting of the fraudulent identities to every major law enforcement agency on the planet. In his hidden office, the Reaper watched as his empire of ghosts began to dissolve. The jars were breaking. The souls were returning to their rightful owners. Greed doesn't just grow, a voice said over his intercom. It was Sarah. It rots. And you're out of time. Chapter 51, The Dawn of the Analog. In the aftermath of the Soul Harvest scandal, the world pulled back from the digital precipice. Biometrics were no longer trusted as the sole proof of existence. The No Hats, No Hoods program was replaced by a more human-centric approach, the physical presence mandate. Virginia Doucette lived to see the day when her granddaughter was awarded the Presidential Medal of Freedom for protecting the American identity. We're back to where we started, Sarah, Virginia said, her voice weak, but her eyes shining with pride. We're just people again. Not digits, not records, just us. Joyce Brandon finally stopped looking at the bushes. The photo of the Winfield Bank was tucked into the back of David Vance's journals, which Sarah had recovered and donated to the Smithsonian. The Wheaton Bandit remained a legend, a reminder of a time when the world was simpler, and a ghost could be caught with a sketch. As the sun set over the Rockies, Sarah Doucette closed her laptop. She looked at her hands. They weren't just tools for typing code. They were part of a history that could never be synthesized. The war on deception was over for now, but in the quiet spaces of the American dream, the shadows were still there, waiting for the next light to flicker. Because greed never truly dies, it just waits for a new name to whisper. End of Shadows of the Self, the Chronicles of American Deception, The Prophets of Deception, a novel based on true events. Prologue, The Cost of a Dream. The American dream is often described as a ladder, but for men like Stephen Warshak and Kirk Wright, it was more of a mirror reflection of what they lacked and a distorted vision of what they could become. One built his empire on the biological insecurities of the common man, the other on the gilded trust of the elite. In the humid basements of Cincinnati and the high-rise glass towers of Atlanta, millions of dollars flowed like water. But water has a way of finding the cracks. And when the cracks widened, the smiles faded, the accounts emptied, and the only thing left was the cold, hard reality of the law. Part 1. The Architect of Smiles. Chapter 1. The Basement Apothecary. Cincinnati, 1996. The air in the basement was thick with the scent of stale coffee and the ozone of a struggling air conditioner. Stephen Warshak, then 31, watched his mother, Sue, hunched over a rotary phone. She was writing down credit card numbers on a yellow legal pad, her handwriting neat and deliberate. "Yes, sir," Sue said, her voice patient and maternal. "Berkeley Nutraceuticals. It's a once daily supplement. We'll have it out to you by Monday." Stephen paced the small room. To an outsider, it looked like a pathetic shoestring operation. To Stephen, it was the womb of a titan. He didn't see a basement. He saw a laboratory of human psychology. He realized early on that people weren't just buying pills. They were buying a version of themselves they had lost, or perhaps a version they never had. "How many today, Ma?" Stephen asked as she hung up. 42 orders, Steve. All from the back of the magazines. Stephen nodded. He had spent his last cent placing tiny, tasteless ads in the back of Playboy, Penthouse, and various hunting journals. The claims were over the top, borderline absurd, but the phones didn't stop ringing. "We need a name," Stephen muttered. "Something that sounds established, clinical, trustworthy." "You chose Berkeley," Sue reminded him. "No, for the product, the big one, the one that's going to take us out of this basement." He looked at a sketch on his desk, a crude drawing of a man with a wide, toothy grin. He wanted a symbol of happiness that was almost unsettling. A man who knew a secret that no one else did. Smiling Bob, he whispered, "The man who has it all." Chapter 2. The Psychology of a Smile. Warshak spent weeks interviewing marketing firms before he found the vision he wanted. He didn't want a bodybuilder or a movie star. He wanted an everyman. He wanted someone who looked like the guy next door, the guy who was just a little too happy for no apparent reason. When the actor who would play Bob walked into the room, Stephen knew instantly. It wasn't just the smile. It was the normalcy of it. Bob looked like a man who enjoyed his Saturday afternoon barbecues and paid his taxes on time, but who possessed a secret vigor that made the neighbors whisper. The goal, Stephen told the director, is to make every man who watches this feel a quiet, gnawing sense of inadequacy. We don't mention the product's function. We show the result. We show the missus at home glowing. We show Bob's self-esteem radiating off the screen. The commercials were shot with high-end equipment, giving them the gloss of a legitimate pharmaceutical ad. This was the masterstroke. By mimicking the aesthetic of Pfizer or Merck, Berkeley bypassed the skepticism usually reserved for as seen on TV supplements. If it looks like a drug, Stephen noted in his journal, they'll treat it like a drug. And drugs are essential. Supplements are optional. We need to be essential. Chapter 3, The Birth of an Icon. By 2001, Berkeley Premium Nutraceuticals was a juggernaut. Stephen had moved the company into a sleek corporate headquarters, but the spirit of the basement remained a relentless, hungry drive for more. The Smiling Bob campaign was his masterpiece. Warshak didn't just buy ad space. He bought time on major cable networks, placing his supplements alongside legitimate pharmaceuticals like Viagra. It was a brilliant piece of camouflage. If a man saw a commercial on a reputable channel, he assumed the product was reputable too. Behind the scenes, Warshak was plowing millions back into advertising. He was a shark that had to keep swimming or die. The revenue was nearing $250 million, but the overhead was astronomical. He needed a way to ensure that once a customer was hooked, they stayed hooked whether they wanted to or not. Chapter 4, The Call Center Grind. John Bradley, a new hire in the call center, felt the energy the moment he walked in. It was electric, fueled by commissions and the relentless ringing of phones. The walls were covered in motivational posters, but the atmosphere was anything but wholesome. Listen up, his supervisor yelled over the din. If they call for the free sample, you get their card, you tell them about the shipping, but you don't spend too much time on the continuity part. It's in the script. But keep it moving. Speed is profit. John sat at his desk, staring at the script. It was a masterpiece of linguistic trickery. The continuity program was the lifeblood Warshak spoke of in his internal emails. It meant that once a customer received a free sample, they were automatically enrolled in a monthly billing cycle. Everything lights up when a new ad airs. John noticed the phones would ring in a deafening chorus. He took his first call. It was an elderly man from Florida, sounding hopeful. I saw the man on the TV. Bob, I'd like to try what he's having. John felt a pang of guilt. He knew the free sample would lead to a $120 charge the following month, and every month after that. The script forced him to gloss over the cancellation policy, a policy designed to be a labyrinth. Chapter 5, The price of disappointment. One of the first victims to truly push back was Ryan. He was a regular guy who had seen the ads and felt the familiar tug of curiosity. $1 for 100 for an 8-month supply felt like a steep price. But the W or money back guarantee was the safety net that caught him. 3 weeks in, Ryan felt nothing. No change. No smiling Bob glow. Then the credit card statement arrived. Not only had he paid the $400, but there was an additional charge of $122. He called the number on the bottle. I paid in full. Ryan told the customer service rep, "Why am I being charged again? That's for your next shipment. Sir, you're on the continuity program. I never signed up for that. And the first shipment was incomplete anyway. I want to cancel, and I want my refund." The rep followed the retention script. "Well, sir, these things take time to process. It could be a few weeks. Perhaps you should try the product for another month. Most men see results in the second phase." Ryan waited, and called, and waited. For 6 months, he fought a war of attrition with Berkeley. When he finally demanded his W or money back refund,